I can't think of a more misunderstood profession in the music industry than record producer. I'll walk you through what it means to me, and I'll take you through 5 of my favorite producers in the rock genre on this episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, a small chain of independent record shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you're ever in this area, please stop by and shop with us. Or if you're in the U.S., you can shop anytime online at ntxvinyl.com. Subscribe to us here on the YouTube channel and follow us across social media at NTX Vinyl is the handle on Facebook and Instagram. All right, we're going to talk about kind of an elusive profession today, and that is the record producer. If you've never been in a studio, you've never worked directly with a producer, you may not know what it even means. And in a lot of ways that makes sense because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In fact, if you asked these producers or any other experienced producers about what their job is or what they actually do, you'd probably get a lot of different answers, which is what makes it interesting to me. As I start to go through a couple of my favorites here, and I've watched a lot of interviews with these guys and others, and the responses are interesting in regards to what they consider their jobs to be. At a high level, a producer is essentially in charge of the moment. They are in the studio, whether it's in the booth, actually out in the room, actually playing the instruments, and it's their job to get the record complete. You know, it's to get it from point A to point Z, not only the songs themselves, but the recordings and the performances. And that's a big part of it, is just getting the best performance out of an artist. Like, that's kind of the way I see production or record producing, is like making sure that what ends up getting pressed to a record or, you know, played on the radio, wherever it may be, is the best possible performance from that artist, from that musician, and it serves the song the best. I think that's another big thread that you'll see through all of this, is that these are producers that I love that really make a point and let the song breathe. Like, they got to get out of the way in a lot of times, and that's part of what makes it a weird profession, because these guys make a lot of money. They make money off doing the job in real time in the studio. But then if an album goes on to sell well over time, they'll make a lot more money, just like the musicians will. And then a lot of times the best thing that these producers can do is just get the hell out of the way and let the musicians do their job. That's a big part of it. But there are times when musicians need help. They're too close to it. They wrote these songs, they love these songs, and they're attached to them in the way that they're structured, in the way that they sound. And sometimes the producer knows better because he's an outside perspective, a third party, if you will, in the studio. That's one of the biggest things I know from working with producers and from reading interviews with these guys, is a lot of times it's just having another voice, having another ear in the studio in addition to the band. Because again, if you're a solo musician or you're working with a group of band members, or maybe they're studio musicians, regardless, everybody is very close to the music and they're inside of it. So having that third party voice outside is very critical. So these are 5 of my favorite rock producers. I'm going to walk you through some of the albums I have from them. Obviously, all of these guys will have huge discographies, but I've just got a slice in my collection. This first guy, I think, is seen from a lot of people's perspective. If they had to guess what a producer would do, this first guy would kind of fit the bill, because not only is he a great engineer and has engineered lots of stuff, not only has he produced a lot of stuff, which I'll show you, but he is also an incredible musician himself. So he can sit behind the mixing board and actually engineer hands-on with the faders. He can stand back and just observe and instruct and shepherd along a project, or he can just get his hands dirty and play the instruments himself. That is very unique. There's not a lot of producers that can do all those things and are willing to do all those things, but Brendan O'Brien is one of them. This is the first album that I own that Brendan produced. This is Core from Stone Temple Pilots. There is a run of albums that I'm about to show you between 90 and essentially 95 from Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jam that, for me, are absolute perfect albums. I love Core, I love Purple, and I love Tiny Music. All three of those albums, the first three albums from Stone Temple Pilots, all produced by Brendan O'Brien. Incredible sounds. Brendan's known for being a pretty straightforward producer in regards to sonics, meaning, whatever's being recorded in the room, that's pretty much what ends up on the tape and what ends up on the record, right? And that's what I love about him. Pretty simplistic style, but he gets great performances out of the bands he worked and works with. So Pearl Jam, you've got Verses, you've got Vitology, you've got one of my favorite records, No Code, and then he also went on to do Pearl Jam's Yield, among others. So those albums from Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jam in the early 90s, Brendan was a huge part of what the sound of that early 90s rock ended up being, from a guitar tone standpoint, from a drum standpoint, just the way he mixes and the separation in his production style and mixing style. And just, again, he's very hands-on, and he's played on a lot of these records too, which is just an amazing thing. But he is just one of those guys that I immediately gravitate towards when you talk about great producers, just because he, again, gets great performances out of his bands that he works with. A couple other great albums that he produced. This is Mirror Ball. This is the collaboration between Neil Young and Pearl Jam. Came out in 1995. That's fantastic. Evil Empire from Rage Against the Machine. Incredible album. Talk about stripped down. Look into the recording of this album and what Brendan did. Just put these guys in a room and hit the record button. Amazing. And then you've also got stuff a little later in his career, like one of my favorite Bruce Springsteen albums, The Rising. That's a fabulous record. And then later in his career, this is from 2014. This is Chris Cornell's Higher Truth, his last solo album, which Brendan not only produced, but also pretty much played on the entire thing. The whole thing is Brendan and Chris. So I love Brendan O'Brien. I love what he brings to the table. There's actually not a lot of interviews out there with Brendan O'Brien. The great Rick Beato did one on YouTube, thankfully, and it's one of the only long-form interviews I've ever seen from the guy. I didn't even know what the guy looked like. He's very elusive, but seems like a super down-to-earth dude, knows music well, incredible musician, and I'm just so thankful that he got to put his stamp on albums like these, because they're ones that have a lot of meaning for me. So Brendan O'Brien, that's the first guy that came to mind and I wanted to talk about. On the other end of the spectrum in regards to production, and I put these back to back because to show you how different it is, this next guy has worked with just an incredible roster of artists and still is, and I've got a tiny sampling of albums that he's produced. But the crazy part about this guy is you won't find him behind a mixing board. He doesn't touch buttons and knobs. He doesn't play any instruments. He can't sing a melody. He legitimately sits in the room and listens. And that is the greatness of Rick Rubin, coming from his very early days of the inceptions of hip hop with Run DMC and the Beastie Boys, up through working with metal bands like Slayer. He's done every genre. He's done every type of music. He's worked with every type of musician, from guys like Danzig. The self-titled record is unbelievable. This is the record from Masters of Reality, self-titled as well. Two phenomenal records, and they sound so good. And a lot of that is Rick. Again, it's crazy to think that he doesn't play any instruments. He doesn't truly have any musical ability as far as his hands are concerned. But if you watch interviews with Rick, and there are lots of interviews with Rick, you'll hear him say he's one of those guys, he just gets out of the way. He is there to listen He's there to absorb what the artist is doing and then reflect back on that and give his thoughts. So literally, if you're a band, or you're a record company, and you're paying Rick Rubin to produce an album, you're literally paying him to listen to what's happening and respond and give his opinion. That's his job. It's an amazing job, and it's amazing how good he is at that job. Albums like Blood Sugar Sex Magic, absolutely incredible. Albums like Wildflowers by Tom Petty, one of the greatest albums ever, in my opinion. I mean, just phenomenal work. Obviously, an entire catalog of albums with the great Johnny Cash. He revived his entire career, going as far as not only to be in the room and producing Johnny, but actually going out and sourcing a lot of these songs that Johnny recorded, like Hurt from Nine Inch Nails. The list goes on. So many great albums. Audio Slave's first record, when Chris Cornell was flailing from a solo career perspective in the late 90s and Rage Against the Machine had broken up, they went to Rick Rubin to produce this record. Unbelievable record. Also, the Avett Brothers. Rick's done a bunch of production with the Avett Brothers. This is one of my favorites, I Am Loving You. Beautiful record. He's also produced, the same year, Give Up the Ghost from Brandi Carlile came out. So incredible discography from Rick Rubin. I love listening to him talk and about his ideals, not only in regards to record production, but just life in general and the creative arts. He's one who is extremely dialed in to what it takes to be a musician, to what it takes to be a creative person, and to take ideas out of thin air and bring them into the world. And that's what Rick does. That's what he helps musicians do. And he's one of those guys, like I kind of talked about at the beginning, that he literally just gets out of the way and listens. Most of the times when you see footage of him in the studio with a band, he's laying on a couch barefoot with his eyes closed, just listening to what's going on in the room and reflecting to it. So I love that. I think it's a very unique thing. And he doesn't work with just anybody, but he will do all genres. It doesn't matter if it's rock, hip hop, pop. He'll do everything if it appeals to him. So Rick Rubin, absolutely one of my favorites. Next on the list, the greatness of Daniel Lanois. I'm going to talk about Daniel Lanois. I'm going to talk a lot about U2 because he has a long history working with U2. So you've got albums like the Unforgettable Fire, obviously the Joshua Tree, maybe the magnum opus, Octung Baby, No Line on the Horizon. A great relationship with U2, as well as co-producers. But Daniel Lanois, he's one of those guys where, kind of back to Brendan O'Brien, Daniel Lanois is an incredible musician on his own. He also has albums, solo albums that he has put out over the years. In fact, I met him in, I want to say it was 2006, 2007, maybe a little later than that. This album, Here Is What Is, I was at the South by Southwest Music Festival and got to meet him and shake his hand and get this CD autographed. This is a great album if you don't know that record. He's got some great solo material, but from a production standpoint, very atmospheric, very vibey. Like as you go through these albums, whether it's the U2 albums or as you get into a little more of his discography, like Peter Gabriel. So that's a fantastic album. Neil Young's Lanois, beautiful, beautiful artsy album. Willie Nelson's Teatro, just fantastic. Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind. There is a vibe throughout a lot of these albums, and I would put Octung Baby on that list as well, that you can hear Daniel Lanois' stamp on it from a production standpoint. Very lush, very like I said, atmospheric and reverb laden production style, which is again very, very unique. It's what makes producers good, is when they have their own style. Rick Rubin's style is to get out of the way. Brendan O'Brien's style is really straightforward, punchy, kind of just almost hit record and capture the band live in a lot of ways. And then Daniel Lanois will layer. He will layer things. He will create a bed of very lush tracks for an artist to perform over in a lot of ways. So whether he's working with Willie Nelson or Neil Young or U2 or Bob Dylan, There's a thread that goes through a lot of Daniel Lanois' records that he's produced that you can kind of hear, which is what I really like a lot of times, because it gives you a feeling that elicits back to that producer, and you go, oh, yeah, I can hear that. And sometimes you can hear a record and not even know it's produced by a certain person, but you hear it and go, that sounds like maybe it was this guy, and sure enough, it'll line up. So that's a lot of those. Again, listen to that Dylan record or the Neil record. There's a lot of common threads in those. Next on the list, I don't have a ton of records from this guy in my collection. He's produced a lot of more underground stuff, which I don't have, but Steve Albini. Going to talk about one of, I don't know if I'm going to say one of the best sounding records in my collection, but it's pretty damn good. Pixies, this is Surfer Rosa, and this is the Mobile Fidelity version, which is fantastic. That's one of the ones that kind of put Steve Albini on the map. He's produced great records by Failure, Comfort, obviously Nirvana's In Utero, kind of the most well-known record he produced. PJ Harvey's Rid of Me. He's produced a lot of other great stuff. That's just a few I actually have in my collection. I love Albini. He's got an interesting style that is kind of a lo-fi. He's a musician as well, and plays. I think he plays guitar, or he did play guitar. He recently passed away, unfortunately. But he's got that style where when Kurt Cobain wanted to work on Nirvana's third record, that's the guy they called. They called Steve because they wanted a raw, really kind of stripped down, in your face, hit record, get out of the way type of vibe. And In Utero, I think, especially if you listen to the Steve Albini mix, where the original mixes that he did, you can kind of hear that stuff. So he uses some creative recording techniques with microphones and that type of thing. So very hands-on, almost part engineer, part producer in a lot of ways, which I think is cool. But I love what he brings to the table on all the albums that I've heard from him, and he's very well regarded and now really missed in the music community, because he was a guy who was really, when you would come into work with Steve Albini, so I hear, he would essentially become a part of the band for that period, which is a really cool thing, because there are certain producers like a Rick Rubin who want to step back and just listen, and there are certain producers who want to get hands-on and get involved and be a part of it, and I think he was more kind of on that side of the fence, which is cool. It's a lot of the reasons why I like some of these guys. There's a lot of different styles. Last but not least, on my top 5 rock producers, I can't leave out Butch Vig. When the guy produces Gish, and then he produces Nevermind, and then he produces Siamese Dream, and then he goes on to produce stuff like Foo Fighters' Wasting Light, fantastic record. Just a great producer and musician in his own right. Obviously, he's the drummer from Garbage. He's always been in Garbage, so not only a very successful production career, but a very successful career in a band. I love Butch, big sounds. If you go to Siamese Dream or certainly Nevermind, you will hear layered guitars. I'm talking multiple layers of guitars. It's a very unique style. In a lot of ways that he brought to the mainstream from an alternative rock perspective. There's a lot of people who will talk down about, hell, even the band themselves, or Kurt used to talk down about the production of Nevermind. Or you'll hear discussion about Siamese Dream and the amount of laboring that went into making that type of album. It's an art. Like what Butch Vig does in regards to the production of the albums he works on is a true art form. He brings so much to the table. And I love, again, the performances that he gets out of bands, whether it be vocal performances or drumming performances, as I think back to like Siamese Dream. Just some incredible, iconic albums that he has brought to life. So Butch is definitely on this list. So you got Brendan O'Brien, Rick Rubin, Daniel Lanois, Steve Albini, and Butch Vig as my top 5 rock producers. There are countless others. Of course, I'm missing tons of great producers, not only from kind of more modern era music, but also going back, to the onset of rock and roll throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s. But these are just some of my favorites, more on the modern rock side. I would love to hear some perspectives from you. What do you enjoy about record production? When you hear a record that is produced really well, what stands out to you, and who are the guys that really pique your interest from producing great albums, and what are those albums? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear some feedback. This is a very short list, so give me the longer list. Tell me who I'm missing. Tell me who you love when it comes to great rock producers. Thanks for watching. As always, this has been Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders, and we'll see you again next time.